Well, good morning, everyone. We want to welcome you to our 8th Efficiency Conference. We're very proud of this Efficiency Conference and tell you just a little bit of the history about the Efficiency Conference. Dr. Jeff Lemkuhler had the idea to start the Efficiency Conference in 2013, and he, and I'm sure working with all the extension leaders at the University of Kentucky, worked together to put the grant together from the Ag Development Board to sponsor the first Efficiency Conference. That first year, we also had a speaker that was kind of the speaker for the Gordon and Susan Jones Fund, and after that year, we decided it would be best if we combined those two, and so we've had 7 of those efficiency conferences when we combined those sponsorships. So if you get a chance to thank the Kentucky Beef Network, actually has the funding from the Agricultural Development Board to sponsor this event, so be sure you thank anyone from the Kentucky Beef Network, or if you get a chance to thank someone from the Ag Development Board, do that as well, because we really appreciate that funding from the Ag Development Board. And a little history also about why I feel so strongly about continuing education. In the early part of my career at Western Kentucky University, I think one of my shortcomings was I didn't emphasize how important it would be for students to continue with education after they got out into the field, farming or whatever they might be. So continuing education has become a really important issue for me, and so that's the reason for my concern and why we feel very comfortable in helping to sponsor this kind of event, and we hope this will become a perpetual fund so that this event will continue long after I'm gone. I just would like to check here. We have a few people I know, maybe several, who've attended every efficiency conference. Could we see the hands of those who've attended every one of these? I know I saw Mike Bach in the hallway, and I know Mike was one of those. I think that's very good, and we appreciate your being here. We appreciate all of you being here, and the sole purpose of this thing is for us to cover material that would be of value to each of us in trying to help us to improve the profitability of our cattle operations. And we learn a lot more all the time. The emphasis behind this specific program we have today was last winter in Kentucky. And I know all of you know what we had: mud and cattle that got real thin. Our feedstuffs weren't quite good enough, a lot of diarrhea and those kind of things. So that's why we planned this. Jeff Lemkuhler is chairman of our committee. And Jeff, I want to tell you, this is the most collegial committee I've been on since I've been in Kentucky. I appreciate the contribution every committee member makes. Those of you who are on the committee to plan our efficiency conference, please hold your hands up. See these people and thank them for being part of the program, if you would. Thank you. Now, we do have a few guests today from out of state. We have some Indiana visitors, and we're happy to do that. We think we probably should do more collaboration with the folks to the north and south here. We like to do that. Those of you from Indiana, please hold your hands up this morning. Thank you for coming down and being with us. We appreciate your being here. I'm going to introduce Jeff Lemkuhler. We're very proud of Jeff Lemkuhler as one of our extension leaders in the state of Kentucky, and Jeff's going to introduce our first speaker this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Jones, and he gives me way more credit. It's easy to kind of a herd of a group of folks that get along and have the same view about the betterment of our industry through knowledge, and so they make it quite easy. All I really do is just try and take notes and send it out. So they give all the good feedback on speakers, and most of us have different avenues of people that we interact with. For example, Dr. Jason Smith, who's our first speaker, he's a colleague of mine and got to know really well. He was formerly at the University of Tennessee as a beef extension specialist there. He originally hails from Virginia. Jason's got a lot of background in multiple areas of the beef production world. We won't say that he was a good fitter, but we do know that he knows how to fit some show cattle, but also is really good on the nutrition side. Worked a lot with producers in Tennessee on developing bull rations, backgrounding rations, cow-calf nutrition. So a really good foundational knowledge base on nutrition, and I hate to say it, Dr. Smith, but probably is going to surpass me pretty quickly, and I say pretty quickly because, well, I just don't want to admit that he knows more than I do right now. But anyways, we're happy to have Jason here. He since moved to Texas and is now working at Texas A&M down in the Panhandle, and has that opportunity to bring a little bit of a different kind of view on the beef production systems in another part of the country for us. And so that's one of the things that we like to do in this conference, is bring expertise from out of the state and out of the region as well to you, to hear from experts across the United States, get a little bit of information on how they may do things in different areas, and find out what we might be able to adapt here in the state from their knowledge and experience. Jason just recently got married. His wife is also a PhD nutritionist and works for one of the feed industry partners that we have. And so in their household, I'm sure there's a lot of discussion about how to feed cattle right, and she probably wins most of the time. But without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Jason Smith as your first speaker of this year's conference.
Well, I absolutely appreciate the introduction. The introduction, Dr. Lemkuhler, and those comments. You know, Jeff is someone that I absolutely look up to as a nutritionist, and has been a great mentor for me as I've developed academically, but also practically. And so I absolutely appreciate the opportunity to be here and visit with you all today about something that I'm passionate about. It's funny you mentioned those conversations. I can remember the worst first conversation my wife and I had about a differing opinion in nutrition, and I'm not going to say who won that one, but the other thing I'll say is it's great every opportunity I have to get back east. You know, I've only lived in Amarillo now for just going on 6 months, and it's amazing how quickly you forget what humidity feels like. And what it's like to actually see the rainfall every once in a while. But without any further ado, I want to really focus on this topic that I was asked to come here and cover, and really how we can impact cow-calf productivity through wintertime nutritional management. I mean, I think the wintertime feeding management is something that all of us struggle with to some degree. It doesn't matter at what level we're at and what our expertise is. It's absolutely a struggle. But I want to focus first and foremost on really what cow energy and protein requirements are. I'll hopefully do that in a little different way than we have historically done it. Talk about some of those implications, so what actually happens when we don't meet those nutrient requirements. And then finish up with some of the considerations for trying to meet those requirements, and tie in some methodology, but as well as some economics. I think the first thing we have to recognize and appreciate about this animal that we are all so fond of is that they are fairly selfish. And what I mean by that is that animal prioritizes, we historically have called it partitioning, but when it comes down to it, it's really just that animal prioritizing how she uses nutrients. Okay, and she's selfish in that she prioritizes her own survival above anything else. And so if we looked at that historical list of nutrient prioritization, it's far more extensive than what I have up on the screen, but I've tried to whittle it down to the main nuts and bolts, and the reality is that as we go down this list, those things, as we move further down, receive less and less priority by that animal. So reproduction generally finds itself at the bottom of that list. And so when we don't meet her requirements for these other things, she takes an axe to that list and she starts chopping at the bottom. She starts sacrificing those things. So she prioritizes herself and then the calf that's already on the ground before she starts thinking about making another one. Okay. So I'm gonna set up two graphs for you. This one's focusing on energy requirements of a beef cow. The next one will be on protein. Conceptually, these are very similar. But what I've done is I've taken what I'm gonna call the average cow in this part of the world. Okay, to me, that's about a 1,300 pound mature cow. So what a lot of us think are 1,000 to 1,100 pound cows. Okay, and I've taken her energy requirements, and I use the net energy system. I believe it's our most precise means of quantifying that animal's energy requirements. And what I've done is I've expressed those in what they would be on average, so an average daily requirement for each month since calving. Okay, so I've got that productive year for that female. I've broken those into her different main uses. Now this is a mature cow, so growth isn't in there. If we were talking about a first calf heifer, we'd have to add in another bar for growth. But I've broken them apart for maintenance, so lactation, so milk production for that calf, and then the pregnancy. And that's the one that we often discredit or don't give enough credit to, would be that pregnancy. Because that little guy that's cooking in the oven requires a considerable amount of nutrients. Okay, and oftentimes we have maybe purposefully forgotten about that for fear of influencing birth weight and calving difficulty. I'll talk about that a little more in the future. I've then taken, let me back up. I've taken all those needs, so those individual uses, get my buttons figured out here, and added them up. So that's what you see as that line. So the main point here is that there is a considerable amount of variation in that animal's nutrient requirements throughout her productive year. Okay. Big thing is her highest requirements are going to be out here about somewhere between 2 and 3 months post-calving. Okay. What needs to happen during that time when her requirements are highest? She needs to get pregnant if she's going to calve once a year. Somewhere there about 83, 85 days after she calves, she needs to get pregnant again. And the issue is that if we're not meeting her requirements or she does not have enough conditions, so enough reserves to fill that void, she doesn't get pregnant there. In an extended breeding season, yeah, she might get pregnant, but it's probably not going to be till out here. Okay? The next I'm going to show is protein, and I've listed this in pounds of crude protein per day. Okay? We often think about protein and these other feed nutrients on a percentage basis, right? But the reality is animals require a certain amount of these nutrients. Okay? And so that line for all those different uses follows a very similar trend. Okay? But again, the point that I want to make is there's considerable variation throughout that productive year for the cow. And you know, one example I want to use is there during her peak requirements, and a lot of that, not all of that, but a lot of that is driven by lactation. That 1,300-pound cow is require upwards of 3 pounds of crude protein. Now, I'm making some assumptions in doing that, and that energy isn't a huge limiting factor in the ration and some other things. Okay? One of the things I want to use this as an opportunity to demonstrate, though, is when we think about designing supplementation programs to complement our forage base, one of those things that's important is that if that animal is actually going to get enough supplemental nutrient out of that supplement to make a difference. And so an example that I will use, and this, I'm just using this because I hear it, and it's a very common thing, is if we take what I'm going to call an economy cooked protein tub. Okay? A lot of us want to use them because of convenience. And I have a substantial protein deficiency in forage. And let's just say that economy line tub is a 20% protein. We'll call it 25% protein. That cow consumes a half a pound a day of it. How much actual supplemental protein is she consuming? She's consuming 1/8 of a pound, maybe during a time when her requirements are way, way, way bigger than that. Okay? Now, please don't interpret that as me coming in and saying don't feed tubs or don't feed a liquid feed, because that's not what I'm doing, because I believe there's a time and a place for those kinds of products. But if we are going to try to fill or need to try to fill a substantial nutrient deficiency, it has to be using something that those animals can physically consume enough of to make the difference. Okay, a lot of other factors, beyond just that animal's stage of production that influence nutrient requirements. We know body weight's a driving factor. Cows get bigger, their requirements generally increase, okay? It's disproportionate, but they increase, okay? Age. First calf heifers are different, and we need to recognize that, and that's why we've always recommended that they be managed differently. Their nutrient requirements are generally going to be 10 to 15% higher than mature cows because they are still growing. They're still growing until after they've weaned that second calf. Okay? So if we have set our management up to meet the requirements of the mature cow herd, and we're running those heifers with them, we are not meeting their requirements. Okay? Level of production, the one we generally think about that we don't have as good of an understanding as we'd like to, is milk. We know milk production potential is a major energy and protein sink for that animal. Okay, body condition. Fat cows typically have higher nutrient requirements than thin cows, okay, to maintain that level of adiposity. Breed composition, so are they continental type genetics, are they British type genetics, or are they conventional Bos Taurus breeds, or are they eared cattle? Okay, these are all things that play into nutrient requirements, how much time they have to spend trying to find forage and go to water. That's probably much more of an issue where I live now than it is here, where it takes about 30 acres to run a cow-calf pair. Okay, those cattle have to travel a much more extensive environment in order to be able to maintain themselves. Okay, environment absolutely comes into play. You know, I was thinking about that this morning where may have been, you know, a little over freezing, but with wind chill and humidity, it's a little bit below that. You know, we don't have perfect numbers for the influence of the environment on nutrient requirements, but we know that these general rules of thumb tend to hold true. Okay, so that feels like temperature outside can be pretty impactful because it takes into account a lot of these things that influence their nutrient requirements. So temperature, humidity, and wind chill. The general rule of thumb that I use is that there's going to be somewhere in the vicinity of a 1% to 2% increase in nutrient requirements for every degree below that animal's lower critical temperature. So the temperature at which it has to start burning energy just to maintain its own body temperature, okay? And for our type of cattle in this part of the world, that's going to be somewhere in the vicinity of freezing, okay? Probably a little under freezing. We know rain and snow, if that animal's hair coat is wet, that influences nutrient requirements because it's no longer providing that insulative barrier. Okay, so it's no longer able to capture as much air around that animal to keep it warm. Mud is one that we often forget about in that it is a huge nutrient sink. Okay, because of what it does to that animal's energy requirements. So slight mud, be a small increase in requirements, but if we think about cattle that are basically covered in mud, their requirements might be as much as 12, in some situations up to 15% greater than they would be without that. Okay? All right, so, you know, all these factors come into play in the wintertime, obviously, because if we think about spring calving herds, there's a pretty important benchmark coming around the corner for us, right? Okay, and one of the things I want to emphasize is that nutrient restriction during gestation, and this is true for any part of gestation. I'm going to focus on late gestation because that's where those of us that are spring calving are at right now, have direct effects on the animal. They have direct effects on the cow, and they have direct effects on our offspring. Okay, and we've got a few gentlemen that'll come after me and speak on some of these specific topics that I think I'm really interested to hear and I think will be really good. But in terms of direct effects on the cow, we know that if we underfeed that cow and she does not have enough reserve or condition to fill the void, that we are going to negatively influence reproductive success. We know reproduction goes down. Okay. In terms of direct effects on our offspring, we know that we cause problems there as well, and primarily through calf health and survival. Okay. We know by not meeting that cow's energy requirements, we are going to decrease not only the quantity, but the quality of colostrum that she produces. So if we want that calf to have a fighting chance early on, have a functional immune system, that's the way we do it. Okay, if we start inhibiting those things, we start causing problems. The thing that we have not given as much credit to in the past that I think is very important is thermal regulation. We generally think of, well, that calf's just going to use milk to keep itself warm. Okay, that actually only contributes to a very small degree of that animal's body temperature regulation. The first 24 to 48 hours of life, that calf metabolizes all of the fat that had previously been deposited in its body. Okay, it burns it as its source of energy. If that cow was energy deficient, that calf has not deposited enough fat in its body to keep itself warm. So those calves that can't keep themselves warm, that wind up in the shop or on the bathroom floor because you're trying to keep them warm. I've been there. I've done that. Okay, that is generally a management issue. Okay, and there are certain animals that we know are more and less susceptible to that. If I think about that first point on reproduction, and this is information that we have known for a long time, is that at calving, if those cows are under condition, they take far longer to return to estrus, being the main driver as to whether or not they are going to get pregnant or not. Okay, and we know that they need to go into the calving season at a body condition score of 5 or 6 if we want them to start cycling again early enough to have a chance at calving once every year. Okay, and we've seen those numbers play out in terms of overall pregnancy rate as well. The other thing that I think is important that we often overlook is that body condition not only influences total amount that body condition at calving not only influences the total amount that are going to get pregnant during whatever that calving or breeding season may be, but it influences distribution. So essentially, not only are we getting more of these females pregnant if they calved at an ideal nutritional state, but we're getting them pregnant earlier in the breeding season. Okay, and that can be hugely, hugely impactful if we think 1 pound to 2 pounds per day for calf growth. Okay, and this is just a predicted line that kind of graphs out what that calving interval would be expected to be at various body condition scores. And again, we really need to be trying to calve cows at a 5 or 6 for them to calve once a year. It doesn't mean there aren't 4s and 4.5s that'll do it, because there are. We just have to be very, very, very determined in selecting those that will, if that's what our management is going to allow. Okay, now backing up to that second point on calf health and survivability and that comment that I made on birth weight, the graph on the left, I want to go ahead and preface this with interpret that with a lot of caution. Okay, and job quantifying is, does that or do any of those options require any additional expense or lead to savings in terms of time, labor, storage, and shrink? Okay, those are real things that have economic consequences. And I think we need to do everything that we can to quantify those and use that information to make some of these decisions. Does that option act as a vehicle delivery for something that's valuable? So those ionophores that I mentioned, okay? Other types of additives. So there is a value to some of those things, and we need to think about quantifying that. And obviously, most of us need to work with a nutritionist to do that, or our county agent. All right, but then beyond all those other things, what option, so once we've whittled down this list, what option is going to be the most economical means of filling that nutrient void? And when I say the most economical means, I'm really focused on nutrient cost, okay, not retail price. Because the reality is that not all products were created equally, and that retail price generally does not reflect those differences. So when I say nutrient cost, once we've answered those other questions, I'm talking about dollars per pound of protein, or dollars per megacal of net energy, or dollars per pound of TDN. Okay, so dollars per unit of nutrient, because once we've calculated that, that does allow us to level the playing field and make more of an apples to apples instead of an apples to oranges comparison. Okay, just an example of a decision-making tool that we had developed a few years ago in Tennessee. I'm not sure if y'all have one similar to this here in Kentucky. It looks like you do. So I would encourage you to use that one. But there are some tools that make these calculations very simple. They're set up for you to enter that information that's unique to your operation. You know, the last thing I want to just mention briefly before I wrap up is mineral supplementation. The fact that I'm giving this one slide does not do it any justice, okay? All right? I wholeheartedly believe, because of some of my previous experiences and experiences that I help producers in Tennessee work through, that especially in our world, that mineral supplementation, a good quality, complementary, year-round mineral supplementation program is crucial in our part of the world. It is just as important during the fall and winter as it is during the spring and summer. I think we often think of mineral supplementation as just being a spring and summer, grass is actively growing kind of thing, and that could not be further from the truth. Okay? We can prevent a lot of problems just by feeding this complementary mineral supplement, at least one that cattle are actually going to consume on a fairly consistent basis. Winter tetany is a real thing. I've seen it firsthand. Okay, where we essentially have grass tetany that had nothing to do with grass. It had to do with a storm where cattle didn't get to eat for a certain period of time, and it throws their system completely out of whack. Okay, we can prevent a lot of that. You know, green ups. So we were talking a little earlier this morning about some of the recent green ups. Okay, grass tetany, based on some of the numbers we saw in Tennessee, and I would assume a lot of that is the same here in Kentucky, that's more of a year-round risk than it is just an early spring or a late fall thing. At least those have been my experiences. Okay. The other thing is that forages and trace mineralized salt, I haven't seen a situation where trace mineralized salt provided enough supplemental minerals to complement that forage and meet the mineral requirements of those cattle. I'm sure there's a situation that exists out there. I just have not seen it yet. Okay, so I do not view that as a replacement for a complete mineral supplementation program. The other thing I will end on with that is I don't believe there's necessarily a silver bullet mineral product. There are a lot of companies that have a lot of really good products that can work in a lot of our forage-based systems. Okay, it does not necessarily take a custom mineral supplement to find that good or right product for our operation. I know I'm probably growing short on time, and so, you know, just a couple take-home points. If I were going to give you a sticky note that you could take home and slap on the refrigerator and maybe glance at or throw something at as you walk by, here's what it would say. Reality is that there are consequences to not meeting nutrient requirements. Okay, my recommendation to you is focusing on cow condition and forage analysis and designing that complementary supplementation program to meet their needs and do that in a level, or meet needs of your cattle at a level that you deem as optimum for your operation. Yes, maximum generally is not optimum. We can feed every cow enough, for the most part, to get almost all of them pregnant. That does not always work out when it comes to economics. So working with your county agent, your nutritionist, your reproductive specialist to try and figure out what are those optimal points, and then once you've determined what those targets should be, focusing on economics and trying to do it as economically as possible. So with that, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to not just visit Kentucky, but be here and visit with you all today. And Gordon, do we have time for a question or two as we transition? All right, just a couple minutes. So questions from anyone? Yes, sir.
Body condition scoring efforts, can you get them too heavy?
Yeah. So, caught it fast enough. Yeah. So can you?
Jason.
What's
Repeat.
Yeah. So the question was on body condition score. I think the same applies to heifers or cows. Can you make them too heavy? So essentially, can you get them too fat? The answer is yes, but it's fatter than we would expect. My experience is we've got to make them body condition scores 8s and above to cause problems with calving difficulty. That calving difficulty is not driven by calf size, but it's driven by adiposity and laziness. Okay? But up to 7s, I generally do not see issues. There is a fear for trying to get overconditioned cows pregnant. I would rather take my chances with an AI rod trying to get a cow that's a little too fat pregnant than a cow that's a little too skinny. Yes, sir.
Best way to supplement their protein.
So the best way the question was the best way or method to supplement for protein. And that's one that's a little more difficult to answer because it is so operationally dependent. So what works for you may not work for someone else. My experience in Tennessee was that if it was available to us, we could handle it and we could feed it to where it all didn't just blow away in the wind, was that dried distiller's grains could be worth its weight in gold. Okay? We know gluten, there's access to a lot of gluten here. Gluten can work. We got to be careful with sulfur every once in a while, depending upon the level we're feeding. There are a lot of different options that can work, and it really is going to come down to what's available to you on your operation, what you can handle, and so on and so forth. But I would encourage you to visit start with your county agent as to who that right, or what that right option might be. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
We've had cattle for years, as most everybody here has. For years, we spring calve. Now we about half and half, have about 50 cows. We always protein supplemented with a liquid cut. 3 years ago, I had a cow that died. She was I think she was 15. She'd been off of the protein supplement, maybe we switched fields for about 3 days, and she's a big eater, but healthy. So we decided we would supplement with a carbohydrate supplement. And we lost a cow this year, again about 14, but a big eater who was also withdrawn for about 3 days. Now both of these cows were fall calvers, both had calves on them. Take that back, they did not. They did not. But anyway, my question is, and I tested the first supplement, the protein, and it was a little higher in nitrogen than the company thought it should be. So, that ammonia, the too much nitrogen ammonia, so that's why I went to the carbohydrate. My question is, you have a cow that's a big eater, and she goes in, is this why my cows die? And we don't have cows that die. And my spring calvers, we always supplemented with the spring calvers, but you see the fall calvers are hungrier maybe, and they're more, some of them are more gluttonous. So I guess why did they die? They're healthy cows.
Yeah, so the question, in a nutshell is, can overeating potentially cause death or issues? And yes, it can. Was that necessarily the case in that situation? Without having having submitted that animal for a necropsy, it's really, really difficult to tell. And so that is where I absolutely want to recommend that if you have an animal die and it is in question, that be submitted to the diagnostic laboratory to get an idea of what it was. But overeating can cause that. That can be an issue.
Okay, I think maybe it was, and of course we buried them. Didn't send in. What do you need to send in? You need to send alcohol if it happens again.
Yes, ma'am. Visit with your veterinarian.
But alcohol,
Yes, ma'am.
be taking calves in, but never a cow.
Are you ready? Okay. I wondered about your opinion of probiotics, prebiotics, enzymes, that kind of thing in the cow herd.
So, question on probiotic and prebiotics and enzymes. I believe the data would suggest that there are certain products that have shown to be fairly effective for receiving cattle and helping some of those cattle deal with stress. Beyond that, my experience has been in evaluating the data, I do not know that there is any golden star type probiotic, prebiotic, or enzyme type product for beef cattle that has has shown substantial influence on cow-calf productivity, at least not in a peer-reviewed type setting.
Got time for one more question, and we'll have all three speakers back up at the end for additional questions.
Yep.
When you're supplementing dry distiller's grain, normally we use that supplement for the protein value of it. Say we do 2 or 3, 4 pounds or whatever. What is the energy value? Say you're feeding 3 to 5 pounds. I know we usually don't figure the energy part of it, but how much value in energy do we get on that?
Yeah, so the energy value of dry distiller's grains is substantial. And that is something that we do not credit enough. As you mentioned, we think about the protein content. And so some of that is going to be dependent upon that batch of dry distillers, whether the fat's been pulled out of it or not. Okay? But generally speaking, the documented numbers will tell you that the energy value of dry distillers grains is equivalent to the energy value of corn. I do not believe that, but I believe that the energy value of dry distillers is just under corn. Okay, if we're talking about full fat distillers, that comes, so an 8 to 10% fat product, that starts to come down a little bit as we start fractioning off and pulling some of that fat out. But I view it as being just slightly less than the energy value of corn.
Jason, thank you very much. We really appreciate a great presentation. Appreciate your questions. Thank you.